Chat, it's my favorite time of the week where we answer y'all's questions. We do this every single week for Q&A Sunday. We've been doing this for like over a year. It's pretty crazy. You guys, for every single stream, every single week, you continue to have more questions that you want to know. I think it's awesome. We got some Q&A stuff that we're going to cover today. We're going to go for about 10-15 minutes. We're going to alternate between YouTube comments from last video as well as everybody in chat. As long as they create good conversation, we're going to pull them. So with that said, let's jump over to the other screen and see what we've got. Justin the Flora God says, hey, for a while, it seemed the new meta was to get 3 super talented individuals like the recent FaZe, Liquid, and Moist rosters. But BDS shows that team play outweighs individual talent. Not true, because all the individuals on BDS are pretty cracked too. Do you think NA needs to rethink how they make future super teams in order to defeat BDS? I don't think you realize how good the player, like arguably some of the best players in the world are on BDS. I think people agree Seiko is arguably one of the best players in the world. I think Monkey Moon, arguably one of the best players in the world. Extra, probably a top 15 player in the world. Like, I still think they're a super team, but what makes them so good is their... If you haven't seen it, I think Johnny does a pretty good job of articulating it in his, like, is BDS's playstyle boring? But even when they were marked by 8, they do a really good job of, like, instinctively understanding where to go and where to be. Like, what makes them so good is they are basically playing one step ahead of the other team. The way they read the game, the way they communicate, the way that they are able to put themselves in a position to be successful while still applying a ton of pressure is what makes BDS so dangerous. And it's not even that certain teams necessarily play bad against them. It's just certain times they just overwhelm you to where you never have a chance to, like, think or take a step back. Like, before you know it, you're down by 2-3 goals and the game's over. And you're like, what happened? I don't even remember what just happened. And when you're stuck in a series and that happens, and you can never find your footing because of how well BDS is playing, is very difficult. So a lot of credit, I think, goes to BDS, and I think this is, I don't think it's intentional. I just don't think you realize how good, like, Monkey Moon is arguably, and has been, one of the best players in the world for the last 2 years. Seiko was an up-and-comer that everybody knew was absolutely cracked, carried the heck out of Endpoint, brought them to success, and then they made the team even better. And Extra is also super underrated. He was one of the best strikers in the world when he was with AS Monaco, one of the worst performing teams in history, and came into a team and is now arguably the best in the world. Like, he's so consistent. It's unbelievable. Like, people hear the superstar flashy players, but, like, BDS definitely has some dang good talent as well. So I think it's more so, like, what they're able to do on the field chemistry wise, and a lot of that is enabled because of Monkey Moon's play. Like, what makes Monkey Moon one of the best players in the world is what he does for the players around him. Like, he's just so reliable. So that level of trust translates quite well. Next one comes from Supreme2X. Should esports companies along with Twitch and YouTube look into upgrading LAN streams to 4K 60? I think in particular, it is a tough battle. The best example I can give you, the only broadcasting network on national television that does 4K streams is Fox. And even they aren't native 4K. They're HD, and then they upscale to 4K. But NBC, CBS, ESPN, all those do not do 4K broadcasts because it's still really expensive. But I do think that if anybody could figure out a 4K broadcast with encodings and all that kind of stuff, it could be places like Twitch, YouTube, etc. Like YouTube quality, like YouTube streams, 30K bitrate streams at 1440p look incredible. It absolutely dogs Twitch. Twitch streams in comparison are terrible compared to YouTube streams. But they still got to work on their delays and their chat interaction environment and stuff like that. I do think that getting to 4K broadcasts is really important, because if I've got a massive TV in my living room and I'm watching downscaled 1080p crap on my 4K TV, it just doesn't look that good. So watching streams in 4K, I think, would be amazing. And I do think that the entertainment industry, when it comes to, like, esports, could do it before the traditional sports do it. And I think if they do that, it will separate and continue to show that, hey, esports built different compared to traditional. But yeah, only Fox and traditional, like, television for sports, for, like, the NFL, does 4K broadcasts. And it's not even, like I said, native 4K. It's upscaled 1080p. So 100%, man. I think that'd be awesome. There is a couple of companies that have experimented with 120 FPS broadcasts, which look so clean. The difficulty, though, is the average consumer doesn't have the internet bandwidth to do that, at least in the States, because for some reason we don't regulate and we allow monopolies for ISPs, which is a whole different story. But like the fact that I can go to some random hotel in Sweden, they've got 300 up, 300 down, that's standard, and I don't pay for it, is crazy. So I do think that there is going to be a desire for that. It's just finding a way to make it accessible and have like quality settings and like scaling and stuff. So fingers crossed. Next comes from JK. Gonna try and ask one more time. All right, third time's the charm. Do you have insight or any explanation on how teams get so much better or worse throughout the season? How does Energy fall off a cliff, but then Moist comes out of nowhere with the same 3 players? How does BDS win it all after going 0-6 the previous major? Is Rocket League that variable? There's a couple factors that go into it. Some teams, while at the top, are trying to maintain and stay at the top. When you're at the top in Rocket League, you are trying to be the change in meta. You're trying to be the one that leads the charge and innovate, while everybody else gets to see the solution. They see what you're doing and are now allowed to look at that. So Energy, who's been at the top for 1.5 years, 2 years, everybody else below them who is playing them is being exposed to what is working the best. And these teams are focusing on how to beat that playstyle, while this team is trying to figure out how to stay ahead, which is really difficult. You have teams that maybe just formed or just getting together. They're still building chemistry. They're still trying to work on communication. They're still trying to figure out who they are as a team. And eventually, what most teams say, like if talking to professional coaches, it takes about 2 to 3 months to implement a playstyle. So while BDS is getting clapped at majors, they're playing with a new player. They're trying to figure out a level of comfort. They're trying to see how Seiko fits into the roster. And after a little bit of time and a little bit of refinement, it clicks. And all of a sudden they go and win a world championship. Moist, another team that was trying to figure out what their playstyle was, trying to identify like, hey, what are we going to do? Let's start working in fakes. Let's start having this have fun meta, minimal strategy, rely on our mechanics, things to that extent. Take some time and a little bit of confidence to come through. And sometimes building that confidence doesn't just happen immediately. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time. Also, yes, Rocket League can be that variable. I think if we run the World Championship again, different team, because sometimes it does come down to who is playing their best on the day. That's why I say, you know, anybody in top 8 arguably has a chance to win the whole thing. Maybe not Energy based on the way they've looked recently, but like without a doubt, I think there is a possibility that if you run that tournament again, very likely that V1 ends up beating FaZe. They go up against G2. Maybe G2 doesn't win as handily. On the other side, what happens if Moist beats Furia and we get a different result there? I think Moist has a better chance against BDS than Furia did. Like, there's certain things like that you talk about that variance that can happen without a doubt in Rocket League. That's what makes Rocket League exciting, is the fact that going into a match, while we do have our favorites, sometimes teams have upsets happen, and they're becoming more and more common. Jiminaldo, I think that's how you say that. Butcher that. What do you think about the way that RLCS does translators for the non-English speaking teams? It seems to me, just as a viewer who doesn't know behind the scenes, that they have teams bring their own translators or use the coaches to translate for players. But in my mind, if it's true, why can't they hire professional translators who know what they're doing and take the load off the teams themselves? It goes both ways. Again, I think we're still in our early infancy of like Rocket League and the like national approach or the international approach to like translations and stuff like that, which I think is cool. The fact that we are starting to see the need for translations, because in the past, those teams never made the main broadcast. We never got to talk to them in the first place. Not that it makes it right. I actually had a conversation with some of the Rocket League esports staff about bringing in, we had at one of the version 1 watch parties that we did at Taco Heads, a person who was deaf, and they don't have someone there that does sign language while watching the broadcast. The accessibility is something that can always be improved upon, and that also includes with translations and translators. Most of the time, the staff has someone there that is bilingual or multiple. I don't know if they're all polyglots, like Wendy is in Czech. She's built different, but the ability to have someone who speaks English as well as their native language is usually easier on the team's behalf rather than finding a one-size-fits-all translator. Also, if it's someone on staff, usually they're a bit more familiar with esports rather than just some like, hey, you're a translator, you do all of it, you know? So with so many different language, so many different backgrounds and all that kind of stuff, it's usually easier if you have the coach themselves or someone on their staff that does it. Yeah, the translator lady for the Falcons was absolutely fantastic. I think she did a phenomenal job. So a lot of those things are very tough. But yeah, they are, like I talked with Psyonix, there needs to be, and they should think about that stuff. The one thing that Psyonix doesn't do that they desperately need to is why they don't have captioning on their broadcast. Like, there is plugins that do it, and while the translation isn't always perfect and the like writing of it isn't always perfect, having a captioning option when you're watching live on Twitch or YouTube is a very easy way to implement something like that for different languages. And that's something that I know they're going to look into, because I brought it up to Murdy and he was like, oh my God, I can't believe we've never thought of that. It's just something that you don't really think about unless it like someone else has that thought, or like it gets outsourced for somewhere where it's like, although you know you need to have it, it kind of escapes you. That happens all the time in different projects where you're like, oh crap, I can't believe I didn't think of that. And then from there on, you just try to be better. So I do think translators and stuff for non-English speaking teams is something that we're always going to strive for it to be better for people. But usually they have teams bring their own, because then it's sourced. The players have a relatability to them. I don't know. Like we did the Furia press conference, and their coach ended up doing it. Mateus, who's awesome. It goes both ways. Otto says, do you think the timeouts used as strategic method to gain the upper hand on your opponent will shape the meta of the game, or do timeouts have no effect on the gameplay? We have seen timeouts directly impact the state of the game. While it may not be the end all to be all, it is, for some reason, that extra minute is enough sometimes of a momentum swing to neutralize a series. We've seen it happen numerous times, and they only use them in best of sevens. I think ever since the implementation of coaches, they tried it in DreamHack in 2019, and then they brought in coaches officially for Season 8 in Madrid, which was December 2019. And you saw an immediate impact of having someone there as like a mental, or someone that can see from the outside looking in as like a third person kind of perspective, how much that helped teams. Teams were no longer being completely blown out. It helped with competitive integrity. We didn't get to see such one-sided affairs. It just made competitive Rocket League significantly better. So timeouts are just another element that gives a little bit more ownership and control to the people playing, which I think is really important. So I think that stuff is really important, and will always be something that, again, is still up to the decision of the players and the coaches. Like, some coaches just won't call for timeouts. Some will. Some use them at different times. Rather than going down by 2 and, you know, trying to bounce back at 2, some people will recognize that, like, yo, this one game was so far off that we got to completely change our strategy. We're going to call this timeout after 1. Like, that stuff happens all the time. So that type of stuff is always going to be, I think, a topic of conversation. We're going to see the like meta of timeouts, I assume, change over time as well. Do you see the capability of defense changing in Rocket League instead of the typical rotation? Like in basketball, there was always some defense or play man-to-man. Rocket League originally started with like a solidified defender, but the game, because it is such a small map, can, like, there's a fluid sense of rotation. We discovered that like early into season 1, season 2, that rather than just having a dedicated defender with 2 offensive players, you are seeing moments of that where like Moist will purposely let 2 of their players go absolutely insane and just be like, yo, cut rotations, take all the midfield boosts, go nuts. And if you 2 still aren't able to do it with like fluid challenges and just go, don't worry, we've got someone super far back that will bail us out, and then we can bring it back the other way if we need to. Teams started recognizing that was happening. They started focusing on that third player back demo and going for big clears. And then rather than holding on a possession, they would just boom the ball back downfield. And like, that is what makes Rocket League exciting, is that evolution of that meta. I think the idea of leaving someone back as a dedicated is possible, and you may see evolutions of it, but the most recent evolution, if you go watch Moist and what Vitira does as that third person back, plays super deep third, allows Joyo and Rise to go crazy, working fakes, fake challenges, shots, dominate the boost game. Like, their boost consumption rates compared is insane. But people also are going to look at that strategy, if it is viable, and say, hey, how do we counter this? And then build a way to change that. So there is, without a doubt, purpose in like defensive capabilities and like positional players and people dedicated to certain things, but your standard rotation has been evolved the way it is because it provides constant pressure all the time. It allows you to get everything you need. It allows you to deny boost, allows it consistent pressure. It allows you to make sure that you have the ability to like always challenge, always shoot, always like, there's no like lull in gameplay. There's no downtime, which is why it was implemented already all the way back in like 2016. We haven't seen anybody else find a way to beat that other than like small iterations here and there, different strategies. But for the most part, consistent 3-person rotation will always be. But the game itself is always going to be reactionary as well. While, hey, this third person is now next in rotation, the ball may pinch or get challenged in a certain way that goes somewhere else, and the person who's second rotation rotating back, it's better for them to cut rotation, go up, and make a challenge or whatever. So with the game and the way that Rocket League plays, that's always going to be part of the style. So Jacob says, love the vids, watch every day. My question is this: should the esports shop be updated sometime soon? I mean, it should be updated as frequently as possible, but that's not always the capability. Some of the limitations with the esports shop and games when you do cross-platform, not just PC. Like, if you run it on Epic Games or PC on Steam, you can update it as much as you want. You can put out as many patches, but there is limitations with PlayStation, Sony, Nintendo, where you're only allowed to apply an update in-game only certain select times. The esports shop has been rumored to be updating in October with new decals and a couple new teams coming in. That is what the current rumors are behind the scenes. I have actually seen some of the new decals, so I can confirm that they are coming, and have seen some of those leaks. I'm not going to put those leaks out, but I have seen some of them. But you can expect to see some updates and some changes, hopefully in October. That's what the rumors are. We don't know if it's actually going to happen or not, but I do wish that they would update the esports shop more frequently. The difficulty for Psyonix's perspective, playing devil's advocate, is if you're a team and you come into the RLCS, what happens if you're like in a crew or a bubble team that like Prestige? Like, look at the fallout that just recently happened with Prestige. All of a sudden you see Prestige make a couple RLCS mainstays, and all of a sudden, like, we don't see them for 6 months and the team falls apart. I don't want to provide in-game decals for a team that's only been around for like 2 months. So they've got to be very choosy and picky about that. I think Falcons is a free one. I also don't know the legality behind putting in some of those decals and like what all goes into it. So it is good to be a little bit more reserved on that, but there's a lot of different factors that go into implementing that type of stuff as well. Last one comes from Fox Gaming. It says, I know you didn't touch deeply on this subject, but what happened to Beastmode and Cloud9? You mentioned ages ago in the off split from fall to winter that C9 offered Beastmode a spot for him to build a squad around him. Was that true? And if so, why didn't it happen? This isn't actually something that I've talked about publicly, and it's not really my story to tell too much, but we can wrap with this one just because I think it's a good way to talk about what's going on in the space right now with all the roster changes and stuff. A lot of times in the offseason, there's a lot of different teams, organizations, etc., that kind of approach things in two different ways. Some organizations will try to find a diamond in the rough type team and hope that they ascend into the RLCS and they get in for like a cheaper amount. Cheap investment, hopefully large payoff. They can either choose to stick with that roster and then update and kind of have this rise to fame situation. Some will sell that roster and do buyouts and make a bunch of money back and then try to find another diamond in the rough. Some organizations that are more prolific will wait for a team to form, like a dedicated team. Case in point, ARG just recently picked up Mark, Dorito, and Atomic. No guarantee that team's going to do really, really well, but with that star-studded lineup, you would hope RLCS top 16 was within their sights. Some organizations take a different approach and find a star player that they want to rebuild around. K-Corp is rumored to be doing this right now with Itachi, where, hey, we really like this one player. We think he is iconic to the space. You saw Liquid do this with Ronicky, and it happens quite a bit. And some organizations realize, like Cloud9, that you can't just go in and buy out a top-tier roster like Energy or whatever, because the buyout is like 7 figures plus. Most orgs don't want to give up their RLCS spot because finding a roster that can consistently be top 8, top 5 go to majors is extremely valuable. And rather than trying to do that on their own, they're like, no, we're just going to keep paying our guys and we're good. So for Cloud9 might be having a tough time trying to find a top tier roster that they can just pick up and sign without having to do with buyouts and this and that. And because Beast Mode, as well as Daniel, I know another player. I don't think Daniel even opened up the email. But I know there was a couple players in the offseason that Cloud9 was like, yo, this is a new up-and-comer. They're very, very talented. What if we just kind of give them what they want? What if we entice them and say, hey, for Cloud9, if you want to build a team and this and that, what do you say? That is another way to entice and potentially find a way into the space by getting in on the ground. The difficulty is you're trying to do that with 15-year-old, 16-year-old kids, which isn't always the easiest. I also think it's kind of a very difficult way to do so. But at the same time, it's a risk. There's always no guarantee, but you would like to believe that a player like Beast Mode is going to be able to find successful players that he wants to play with. So it is true. Cloud9 did approach Beast Mode. They approached a couple other players as well about trying to entice them with a lot of money and say, hey, we will let you build a team. We'll pay for it. We're good to go. The difficulty is there's not always a guarantee of that as well. I look at that from the business side of things and say, hey, Cloud9, if you're doing that, sign me then. Sign me right now. Sign me as a player before I find a team for you. Because the issue I take with that is it basically means Cloud9 isn't going out and scouting and trying to do stuff. They're basically relying on the player to do it, which I don't necessarily think is a bad idea. Like, I think those players that are really, really talented, that are up and coming, have a better idea of who's also talented because they play with them every day in ranked and 6-mans than Cloud9's own homework and research department's going to do. Because who knows better than the pros themselves? So I don't think it happened because Beast Mode was already trying out with a bunch of different rosters that he felt pretty dang comfortable with. We talked about this a little bit earlier on stream. He was trying out with like Daniel and Aqua at one point they were queuing together. Obviously, he tried out for V1. He tried out for Envy at one point. Like, I think as a player, being able to go to something that's already solidified and has like a guaranteed foundation is a little bit safer and a little bit less risky than like, yo, big name Cloud9 coming in. Let me try to figure out, because again, that's a lot of pressure as a player too. When a tier 1 org comes to you and says, hey, build a team, if that team doesn't work out, that's on you. So I think that's part of the reason why it comes to be. So again, I wish I knew the specifics of what was going on in the mindset of people like Daniel or Beast Mode or whatever, but I am also not 15 and I don't know what the thought process of ages are that area. So hopefully that answers the question and provides some of the insight of like kind of the factors that go into it. But yeah, 100% was true, was 1 billion% a potential option. But I'm very happy biasly that Daniel and Beast Mode and them didn't go that route. So specifically Beast Mode going to V1 makes me very happy. That is going to do it for this week's Q&A video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the conversation. If you guys would like to be part of these in the future, 2 ways you can do it. Number 1, on this video, make sure you leave a comment down below with your own questions. Best ones, make sure you give a like to so they come to the top. And we'll try to answer them next week. The other way is come over to the stream, twitch.tv/Lawler. Stream every day but Tuesday and Sunday. You can either, throughout the week, come and ask questions. Basically what my streams are is a live Q&A every single day. You guys drive the conversations. Basically like a live podcast. Or come over during these videos. We usually like record them on Wednesdays, Thursdays, sometimes Fridays. And be there for that. We try to alternate between both. So that's it. Let me know what questions you got for next week, and we'll see you there. Peace.